so for those that know me, you realize I tend to wander across a lot of different topics. So, and I liken that to the issue of a tour guide. There's kind of two tour guides out there. One's the kind of tour guide where at 10:15 you're going to see the Colosseum, at 11:30 you're going to see the Sistine Chapel, blah, 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 goes down the line. And then and so very structured. I don't have any PowerPoint, so I'm the unstructured. And the unstructured is kind of the tour guide that kind of makes those stops happen, but you will do a lot of wandering, and you're probably wondering, am I really going to get to the Colosseum? When is the Sistine Chapel really going to go up? But you learn, hopefully you'll realize you kind of learn a lot along the way. So there's vast amounts of wandering here. So I hope that won't bother you. Okay, so where are we going to start? Oh, I suppose with my cold too. So I should say I'm a bit under the weather, and I'll blame the Academy of Management on that. Typically I submit 6 things and I usually get 1 acceptance. So I've depended on that for like the last 10 years, usually only 1 with 6 in. This year all 6 seem to get accepted, but they all got accepted like at 8 a.m. So tomorrow morning I'll have another 8 a.m. session. So I'm a bit under the weather, so sorry for the coughing. I'm going to start with this quote. I don't know how many of you are, so I liken myself as a writer, okay? And so I read a lot about how writers write, and you may be familiar with the Paris Review on writers on writing, and the art of fiction and the art of criticism. Please someone nod their head yes. Okay, it's very powerful, and for me it's really important because basically you're reading huge stories of misery about how hard it is for professional writers in fiction and all the other ones to write and communicate in ways that make a lot of sense. So in 1991 there was this wonderful quote by Harold Bloom, who was the first time they'd actually did a profile of someone who was involved in the art of criticism. And I've taken this quote to heart. This is on my desk every day. And I'm going to relate it to how eventually we're going to float into SAP, believe me. Okay. But we have to hear my odyssey of kind of like how that worked. So, what you pride yourself on, the things that you think are your insight and contribution, no one even notices them. It's as though they're just for you. What you say in passing or what you expound because you know it too well, because it really bores you, but you feel you had to get through this in order to make your grand point, that's what people pick up on. That's what they underline. That's what they quote. That's what they attack or cite favorably. That's what they can use. What you really think you're doing may or may not be what others think you're doing, but it certainly isn't communicated to others. I've talked about this to other critics and other writers. They haven't had quite my expensive sense of this, but it strikes an answering chord in them. One's grand ideas are indeed one's grand ideas, but there are none that seem to be useful or even recognizable to anyone else. It's a very strange phenomenon. It must have something to do with our capacity for not knowing ourselves. So that's how we begin it, not knowing myself. So I want to segue into strategy as practice by getting into Mintzberg. But I want to do that with kind of my own story of kind of how I related to Henry Mintzberg and how the Mintzberg stuff in the 70s relates to where SAP is. I'm kind of famous for an article called Who is an Entrepreneur is the Wrong Question. And many assume it's basically an attack on traits, that I was after Frank and the Carlins to kind of like go after this characteristic thing and to make their lives miserable. And that's the stuff that was kind of like I was passing through. That wasn't really the point of where I was going in this issue of who is an entrepreneur is the right question. In fact, it was the highlight of the paper should have been this, kind of a quote from Mintzberg. I end the paper with this thing here. Entrepreneurship research should follow the path of research taken in managerial behaviors, Mintzberg, 1973, and we'll get back to. God, that's a long time ago, 50 years. Mintzberg's articulated issues regarding managers are also issues that confront entrepreneurship. Substitute the word entrepreneur for manager and entrepreneurial for managerial in Mintzberg's statement of the purpose of his study. In quotes, we must be able to answer a number of specific questions before we can expect managerial training and management science to have any real impact on practice. What kinds of activities does the manager perform? Does that kind of resonate with SAP? What kinds of information does he process? Who must he work with? How? How frequently? What are distinguished characteristics of managerial work? What is of interest about the media that managers use, the activities he prefers to engage in, the flow of those activities during the workday, his use of time, the pressures of the job? Sorry for all the he's. That was Mintzberg. Okay, so what basic roles can be studied from the study of managers' activities? What roles does the manager perform in moving information, making decisions, and dealing with people? What variations exist among managerial jobs? To what extent can basic differences be attributed to the situation, the incumbent, the job, the organization, and the environment? To what extent is management a science? To what extent is the manager's work programmed, that is repetitive, systematic, and predictable? And to what extent it is programmable? So to what extent can management science reprogram managerial work? This was 50 years ago, okay, and kind of like, where have we gone? Well, one of the things as I kind of prepared for this conference is to kind of go back and kind of look at where SAP was in relationship to kind of like the intellectual milieu. And the interesting thing to me was a lot of the criticisms of SAP were about saying, well, didn't Mintzberg already do that in 1973? Don't we already know everything we need to know about what managers do? So this is just kind of like repeating what's already been done. And that is a ridiculous criticism, to be honest. If you look at the Mintzberg replications, you know, a couple of them. One is, you know, the powerhouse one that came out was Kunkel and Aldrich in 1983, who said Mintzberg was right. They tried to duplicate exactly the kinds of people in the kinds of firms doing the same kinds of things, and they got fairly similar answers. But if you look for other replications, I could only find less than 5. Okay, so maybe my Google Scholar is really, really slow, and I couldn't figure it out. But there's very few replications about what managers do using Mintzberg's capabilities. So, you know, he was basically saying managers are busy, interrupted, they have little control. But, you know, when I've looked at other studies, excuse me, you know, one in 2001. So think about 1973. You have a phone on your desk, right? There's no internet, okay? You're kind of like in a building with a bunch of offices in it, but, you know, think about it. By 2007, everyone has a phone. You know, you're on Zoom. And you know, we complain about the fact that you're working 24 hours a day because you're basically connected to what goes on. So, you know, to me, Mintzberg has become irrelevant in terms of where the tools are today. So the Swedish study came out in 2001, 4 CEOs, they're fairly similar, but you know, they basically had more meetings, less desk work, and they worked at home. So they had worked more times and they talked more, and their meetings actually were longer, and they had email, and there was less fragmentation. So, you know, think about what 2023 would be like after COVID when we're all basically inoculated with Zoom and the rest of it. You know, what is our work life like? I think it has nothing to do with kind of like Mintzberg's world, and I think most managers are not that way. I'll actually give you a personal story of my own Mintzberg experience. So, you know, kind of coming out, I finished my dissertation in '82, went to University of Virginia. The Mintzberg thing was certainly always on my mind because this issue of what do entrepreneurs do has really been kind of the nature of my career. But I was teaching an introduction to management class, and I thought, how can I make that powerful for our students about what managerial life is like? So I said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to divide you in teams of 5. Each student needs to be open to spending a day with all I could find at UVA were middle managers. You know, like someone at head of services, someone at head of food, all that stuff. So they had a whole bunch of subordinates. And each student then basically coded using Mintzberg for a day. Never got published because there's reliability issues. You know, when you only have one observer out there, the better way to have done it, if I'd have been intelligent, is have 2 students, so 10 students on a team, 2 each day, then we could have gotten inter-rater reliability. But I was new to how research was done. And what did I find? I found that actually there was less fragmentation and brevity, less on the phone and the desk. For the most part, they just spent time talking to people, okay, and trying to solve problems. Okay, so that was one. And I guess I'll even personalize it to say my own managerial experience. Because of a lot of work I'd done kind of growing up, I got my MBA at 23. And I ended up working for a company called Hertz Rent-A-Car that at that point was owned by RCA. And RCA was using it as a way to generate massive amounts of depreciation. Okay, and that was my job. I'm a cost accountant and really, really good at it. Coming to that organization, I supervised 9 employees. And the first day of the job, they came to me and said, here's what will make your life really good. Our last manager, who we got rid of, micromanaged us all the time. So here's the deal. The youngest person there, my youngest employee was 29, I'm 23, and the oldest was 54. And they said, to make our lives easy and your lives easy, don't bother us. Okay, if we have a problem, we'll come and tell you and you can solve it. But otherwise, leave us alone because we've been experts at what we're doing for a very long time. So I spent a year as a manager reading magazines and applying to graduate school. Okay, so so to me, my own personal experience is, obviously I'm probably an outlier on the process, but to me it kind of comes down to my own experience does not fit Mintzberg in any way as a manager of other people. Does that kind of resonate with other people? Entrepreneurship became the same thing for me. My study of entrepreneurs was 106 entrepreneurs. I followed them around, wrote case studies of them. They did all kinds of questionnaires. And the diversity of the entrepreneurial phenomenon is huge. There's not one kind of entrepreneur out there. Okay, so the point is, how much do we really know about managerial work, given the fact that Zoom, email, phone, it's all out there? And I want to bring up Martin Lacaus. He's at Chalmers University. He did a wonderful study, experience sampling in entrepreneurship education and practice in 2023. And basically, one of the things that I think is very important to realize about entrepreneurs is they don't have a 9-to-5 job. They're kind of like always doing entrepreneurship. So the experience sampling is that randomly he would beep them with beepers he gave them and asked, what are you doing? Okay, so we could kind of get this large sample of what are you doing over time to realize that a lot of the activity of entrepreneurs isn't 9 to 5 and it's not kind of what we think about what's happening. So observations matter, okay, but that's kind of in the SAP world, it's not new to you or going, well, Bill, welcome to the club. And I've got read chapter 3. Oh. Before I offer how to become a division, because I have the secrets to that, I'm going to read the SAP thing. Also, my wife and I had a big discussion about this. So, I'm going to propose MAP, Managerial Activities, and she says, that's really an awful name. But I don't want to offend you, but I'll just say, MAP is better than SAP. Okay. So, I think you need to think about if you're going in this more inclusive direction about how you want to deal with it. So, what I want you to think about is all the different ways that practices happen and kind of you can substitute management, leadership, innovation, entrepreneurship for every time SAP is said. The mission of the SAP Interest Group is to create a developmental community for academics and practitioners who wish to advance knowledge and understanding of strategy, entrepreneurship, innovation, leadership, you name it, what people do, as something people do, thank God, rather than something that organizations have. We aim to offer opportunities for lively and stimulating engagement to scholars sharing this interest. I'll probably kind of just end there. But, that to me is revelatory, really. For all of the years since Mintzberg that we've been kind of like studying what management is, how much do we really know about what managers do? I can say I have over 40 years struggling with what do entrepreneurs do, and it's still a huge question mark for me. Okay, the more I know, it's kind of the Zen thing. The more you know, the less wisdom you probably really have. So, so again, observations matter. And that to me is the fundamental basis for what SAP has been about. Now I know there's controversies about that, but I've got ways I think to solve it that you will say are pretty stupid, but I think that there's some relevancy. So how to become a division? I've got some numbers for you. First, grow, okay? But you don't need to grow as much as you think, okay? So you first of all need to become more inclusive. If you really, EAP wants to be much more part of what's going on here. And I know there's a special EAP track, so it's not like you're not paying attention to them. But there's leadership as practice, innovation as practice. There's kind of all, what people do in organizational world needs to be kind of included in where we go. And you know, my sense is I would be evangelical towards the OB people, OT people, almost any of the other divisions, there's some way to dialogue. I did a study to look at what the sizes of the other divisions were to be able to legitimately say, we're just as big as everyone else. Now, Christine, I'm going to have to joke about the history division. So obviously the smallest division is management history, but that's a division. There's 377 people in there. So where are you? You're about seven something or other. And, oh, it's right here. SAP is at 620. If you were at 820, here's all the divisions you beat. All of a sudden you beat the critical management studies people, you conflict management. So critical management studies is 691, conflict management 654, the health management division 736, and the PNP division, that's the kind of one on neuroscience. No, that's not neuroscience, it's something else. 685. So if you had 200 people more, which I think would be easy to get from just the entrepreneurship people, you would be higher than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 divisions out of, I think, about 16. So, you know, that would be my goal over the next year or so is, you know, invite, evangelicalize kind of the community so they realize that this is a place where you're observing what people do in the world of organizations, not only in strategizing, but in other ways as well. Okay. Second. Should I tell you the story about how the entrepreneurship division became a division? The interest group became a division. So it kind of goes back to this problem. Here's the randomness of how I got into the field in some ways. So the Academy of Management was meeting at the Lozana Hotel in Dallas. I was a junior scholar, going to fly back to the University of Virginia, and my flight was at 4 o'clock. So I was sitting in the lobby because, you know, the luggage sitting there. And Jack Hornaday comes up to me at that point, was the interest group chair, and he said, "When's your plane leaving?" I said, "Oh, it leaves at 4 o'clock. And he says, "You're it. You're the new chair of the Entrepreneurship Interest Group because everyone's leaving by 1 o'clock. And you're not going to leave till 3. You can show up at the meetings. Thank you." And he handed me a bunch of stuff. And it was like, what I realized about that, and this is how the Academy has changed, is that at that point it was a year-to-year position. So at the end of the year I would just transfer it to someone else who would know what was going on. So I immediately figured out that all the other divisions had like a 3 to 4 year process, which is what SAP does. You know, you start as program chair, then you actually PDW chair, then program chair, then chair, and all that stuff. So I kind of started that process, which kind of got us some administrative capabilities. But also, and I'll say this on tape, it won't bother Jack Pierce, this comes to my second point. You need champions to love you above you, okay? And if you don't have a champion, you're doomed, okay? So how did that work for the Entrepreneurship Interest Group? Well, there was a fellow named Jack Pierce who was doing small business and entrepreneurship. He was on the board of governors, okay? Who became the next Entrepreneurship Interest Group chair? Jack Pierce. Okay, so is the board of governors going to say to Jack, "Well, Jack, you know, we kind of love you, but not that much, so entrepreneurship isn't going to happen"? No, it got passed because we had a champion at the board of governors. So think about, who your champions are. I know there's an evaluation committee, but there's also a board of governors. If you don't know who they are, you're in trouble. So kind of map out who you're going to have be involved in where you go, because otherwise you'll be an interest group for a long time. And you shouldn't be. This should have happened like 5 years ago. You should have been a division. So basically this issue of who loves you. And if you don't know who loves you in the academy, at these administrative levels, you've got some challenges. And frankly, too, in the issue of growing, we went from 450 to 1,200 in 2 years. But a lot of that was, you know, Bill Gates showed up in the 80s. And all of a sudden there were entrepreneurs are making a huge amount of money, and there was a way to create value that wasn't in a big corporation anymore. So entrepreneurship took on some traction. 3, celebrate your focus. I've read all the history of kind of like how the excuse me, how the Board of Governors and the Evaluation Committee have kind of like thought about what SAP is. And this is my interpretation, which will probably be wrong. But my interpretation is that there's real struggle with the fact that while there's theory about the nature of practice, the whole point is to study what people do. And from there it surfaces up. But being in the field is just fundamental to what the group is about, okay? It just is, okay? So evidence through observation is really, really important to what the field is, whether it's an EAP, SAP, leadership as practice, innovation as practice. So this brings me to a really strange part of this presentation called the critical mess theory. And I've been writing about the critical mess theory, and none of you have read any of this since 1994. It showed up in a whole bunch, I've had a whole bunch of book chapters on this, hoping that someday people would pay attention to it. So now, thank you. You're going to be in the audience to have to pay attention to it. But the issue with the critical mess theory is evidence matters, and a lot of evidence matters. So I'll kind of read you this actually came out in 2002 as a part of a special issue in the Journal of Adventuring, the critical mess theory. We borrow a label from this sensibility of immersion from the profile of Michael Zinman, a bibliophile, and Michael Reese's insights into Zinman's strategy for collecting books. So here's the strategy. You don't start off with a theory about what you're trying to do. You don't begin by saying, I'm trying to prove X. You build a big pile. Once you get a big enough pile together, the critical mess, you're able to draw some conclusions from it. Okay? You see patterns. People who have the greatest intuitive feel for physical objects start from the relationship with the objects and then acquire the scholarship instead of the other way around. The way to become a connoisseur is to work in the entire spectrum of what's available, from utter crap to fabulous stuff. If you're going to spend your time looking only at the best, you're not going to have a critical eye. So that's how Zinger ends it. And then we kind of end our our chapter in JBB, which was on qualitative methods. It was kind of the first special issue on that in JBB. Qualitative researchers are like to be the connoisseurs of entrepreneurship scholarship, only that they are more likely to immerse themselves to a greater depth and in a wider variety of situations where entrepreneurship occurs. We encourage all entrepreneurship scholars to develop a critical eye in their efforts to explore entrepreneurship and hope that more work will be undertaken to utilize qualitative methods for seeking an understanding. 2002, 20 years, 21 years? So, but there's, I think, a huge amount of pushback in relationship to that. And then, it wouldn't be a Bill Gartner presentation without a poem. I don't have a haiku for you today, but I will read you my favorite poem right now, which to me encapsulates everything about what SAP is trying to do. Okay, so pay attention. It's called Epilogue. It's by Robert Lowell from his book Day by Day. Epilogue. Those blessed structures, plot and rhyme, why are they no help to me now? I want to make something imagined, not recalled. I hear the noise of my own voice. The painter's vision is not a lens. It trembles to caress the light. But sometimes everything I write, with the threadbare art of my eye, seems a snapshot. Lurid, rapid, garaged and grouped, heightened from life, yet paralyzed by fact, all's misalignments. And this is the key sentence. Yeah, why not say what happened? That's, I think, your motto. Yet why not say what happened? Pray for the grace of accuracy. Vermeer gave to the sun's illumination, stealing like the tide across a map, to his girl, solid with yearning, we're poor passing facts, warned by that to give each figure in the photograph his living name. Yet why not say what happened? I think that's our story, isn't it? Why not say what happened? And it's a powerful story, but we frankly oftentimes don't get a chance to say it because we're kind of bound by a kind of a theoretical reality here where, you've got to have a theory about what you're doing. Now, I can understand that when you go out into the field, you've got assumptions about how the world works, which is your kind of theory and practice, which you could articulate as the poem does. But but frankly, it's what's in the field that tells us what's important about what people do. Strategy is all about how people do strategy. It's not magic. It's not always 5 people go into a room and then strategy magically happens and they come out. It happens all these different ways. And that's what you've been doing all these years, is really studying the process of it, what those activities are, how the interactions work. That's really powerful. But we need way more of it. I've been arguing this in entrepreneurship practice from the first day I was at entrepreneurship practice, to say, don't feel bad about the fact that you're documenting what entrepreneurs do, because if you don't, we won't know anything about it. You can theorize all you want about lean startup and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, we don't know very much about, well, how did they actually raise money? Okay, who did they meet? When did they meet him? How did they go about it? One of my entrepreneurs, for example, so this is kind of like this, the weirdness of how the world works. So this is a long time ago, but I had an entrepreneur, he was living in New Jersey, was trying to kind of like get money from people in New York, and every day he'd take the train in New York and kind of push people. But one day, as he's sitting next to a guy, the guy said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I've got this business plan on X." Okay. And as they went through the train thing for about an hour, the guy next to him said, "That is so cool." An hour is a long time. "That is so cool. I'm going to put money into it." And from that day forward, that entrepreneur merely rode the train back and forth from New Jersey to New York, back and forth, raising money. Okay? Because think about it, an hour on the train with someone saying, "Oh, this is really cool. I really love what you're doing." You don't get that with VCs and stuff like that unless they really love you. So, you know, there's lots of different, and that's my dissertation and a lot of other research. The panel study of entrepreneurial dynamics, one of the largest quantitative databases on what entrepreneurs do, is all about these kind of activities. And I can tell you, there's no sequence that everyone does. You can start, you know, so now we're going to wander. You know, one of the famous definitions of entrepreneurship was Howard Stevenson's definition. Entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity without the use of resources. Okay. Now, that definition came about because he came out of real estate, where the whole point of real estate is putting the deal together. You don't, you know, you may not have the land, as he says, you know, I've spent some time with him. You know, you don't have the land, you don't have the building, you don't even have all that stuff. But if you put it together, you make a lot, you create value. Okay, so that's the real estate background. But I have a lot of entrepreneurs that they start with the resources, what they have. My favorite example of that is there's a fellow named Terry Allen. He wrote a book called No Cash, No Fear. And this is how I spent a lot of time with Terry, and that's only because when I was at UVA, Terry was getting a DBA at UVA, and the reason for it is he said, academics is the biggest scam I know. He says, for the amount of time you have to spend actually doing work, I can't think of a better deal. So I'm going to get a PhD. But what he really liked to do is start businesses and give the money away. Okay, but his rule was, I will never start with any of my own money. Okay, and so he wrote a book about how you can not kind of like do that, but also it's all resource based. It's all based on other people's kind of certain resources about it. Okay, so I want to reemphasize, it's hard to pay attention. I've got a big poster on that, and I can say, it's just, I think that's, you know, we can say to people, you know, observe, you know, the Louis Agassiz thing, if you read Harvard, that one case on it, you know, having Agassiz kind of like, am I saying his name right? The biologist who kind of did fish and that, and he would have people spend a week looking at a fish, okay, and basically when they would report back for that week, he'd say, you don't get it, you haven't figured it out, keep looking. And then, you know, they'd start to draw and they'd do all kinds of stuff, and all of a sudden you begin to understand what these fish are about. But that's really hard work, and our kind of time is really hard to do that. And also, field work is really time consuming, okay. So at EIP I got myself in a lot of trouble, so I'll try to tone this down. I find the obsession with theory to be problematic. I'll say that in a gentle way. I find the obsession with theory to be problematic, okay? Particularly when you don't have any evidence to talk about what people are doing. Hello? Okay, so, you know, I tend to use biology as rather than physics, which again is more theory about maybe how the world works that you can't see. Biology is, most of the biologists if they're kind of doing field work or going out. Since I'm a Babson beaver, I'll use beavers. So, you know, they go out, they observe beavers, and then they ask themselves, you know, what are these beavers doing across time? How are dams get built? Why are they building the dams this way, not that way? Are beavers on the west coast different than beavers on the east coast? And they spend their whole life observing beavers, and that's okay, and they can publish that. Beaver behavior, you know? So it's okay in biology to observe and document, and frankly, I don't think we have a theory of beavers, and that's okay. And I don't think for a lot of what we do in management, we need to have a theory about it. We just need to say, here's examples of the nature of the process, okay? And I think that would really be valuable. So, where am I? I've said, in order to become a division, you need to grow, you need champions, celebrate this focus of really paying attention, and saying to the academy, I would say it to the academy violently. Say, we're in the observation business because none of you are. You know, I would just defend them. I would just say, you know, all you want to do is do theory, you don't have any observations, and it's hurting the field. We always talk about the importance of practice. Well, what is practice? That's people doing stuff. So, you know, where have we gone in this field? But anyway, I think it makes the rest of the divisions, who are particularly, you know, AMR and the rest of the journals are very theory driven, you know, kind of angry. Because it's like, well, but that's what we do, and obviously, why would we support anti that? Okay, so my last, maybe it's my last point. I think the field needs a journal. Okay, I don't think it needs to happen before you become a division, but I think you need a journal where facts and observations become the primary aspect of what you write about. Okay, and without a theory to say, here's what happened. Okay, because that, I'm going to come back to that point. Yeah, why not say what happened? That's kind of the whole thing, and I think that's where your group is. That's where EAP is. That's where leadership as practice is. Theory can come out of that, so I'm not going to denigrate that you can generate it from what you do, but at the end of the day, it comes from observation, and we need to document it rather than kind of keep it to ourselves and then maybe fantasize about developing a theory. If I knew more about what entrepreneurs were doing from other people, so I'll wrap up by saying, wouldn't it be cool if we all did field work where every year and I actually had to do this for my PhD, hang around an entrepreneur for a year and see what they're up to. And then we report on it. There's a couple of cases out there long ago on that whole thing of reporting on what these entrepreneurs do. So, you know, wouldn't that be cool? If everyone in the room did an entrepreneur a year, all of a sudden we've got a huge data set of, I think, very heterogeneous behaviors about the nature of strategy, how it works in different companies, in different contexts, kind of, all of that kind of needs to happen in different ways. And then I think we can have a better conversation about kind of the theory of strategy making or the theory of how entrepreneurship really occurs. But unless we get there, and this is the desperate plea I would make to the academy, unless we have more observations, it's just not going to happen. Mintzberg tried it in '73, but what do we know since Mintzberg? I think very little, okay, and particularly since technologies have changed. So anyway, that's going to be my end of my presentation, and then we'll kind of like dialogue. And that's always the more fun for me because I can even be more outrageous. My goal will be to make you mad, and then just have you stand up and say, I cannot bear you anymore, and then leave the room. Okay.